before.
Oh my gosh, so funny. I love that. Well, we all are loving your book and have been chatting about it. Although I have to admit, we got a little off course in our discussion and started talking about how much we all love to read and the importance of sort of reading and writing, because your book brought all of this to mind for all of us, right? Just so, how so many people also worked in publishing at the young age or wanted to be writers. And, so maybe you could just start with how you got there and then why you ended up writing the book about it.
Yeah, like with how I got to working at the agency,
Yeah, so like
or
how you knew you wanted to be a writer and yet you took the job, as you write about beautifully. And then now I was saying, like, we know what happens kind of because we're holding your book as we're reading your story, right? We know that you've succeeded as much that we're reading about it. So just a little more about that whole journey. That was a very broad question, but bear with me.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the real truth is that I think like a lot of people from, let's say, kind of more conventional or more conservative backgrounds and families, being a writer didn't seem like a real possibility for me. Um, so my parents were both first generation Americans. They're both Jewish, but from very different backgrounds themselves. And like my dad was a red diaper baby, and his parents were union activists, and my mom was from a very kind of socially conservative family, and that owned a restaurant in the Adirondacks. And they both kind of clawed their way to the upper middle class in a way, in the way that a lot of kids of immigrants do. And for me, and I should explain here also that my parents are kind of World War II generation, greatest generation people who had me very late in life. So my mom is 90, and so I grew up surrounded by parents who had a very different ethos, who were baby boomers, who were kind of like, do whatever you want, for their kids. Whereas my parents were like, you are going to go to law school or medical school. Like those are the only two options for you. And, it was clear from a young age that that's not what I was going to do at all. But so I was basically, my point is that I was always trying to find a kind of socially acceptable way to do what I wanted to do, which was write. But I couldn't even admit to myself that what I wanted to do was right. So even in college, I went to a college that was renowned for its creative writing program, and I didn't take any creative writing classes. I became an English major, but I told my parents that I kept telling them stories of English majors who had gone to law school,
I know a bunch, by the way.
She went to law school at Georgetown, and that kind of thing. And so so really that's how I ended up taking this job. To make a very long story that maybe is not even that interesting, but I think maybe a lot of people feel this way, that they're trying I guess the other thing I should add here is that even though my parents were sort of definitely, in the sort of upper middle class range, for a bunch of different reasons, partially just their ethos, and partially because I feel I don't usually talk about this, but this is actually the subject of my next book, so I have to get used to it. But I have a much, much older sister. She's almost 20 years older than I am. And she, some very tragic things happened to her just before I was born, and then in the years afterward. And my parents really supported her for my whole life, and did not, as you see in the book, did not really provide me with any financial support. So I didn't have the kind of safety net that a lot of people do. Like when I was working at the agency, I went to Oberlin for college, which, now is sort of famous for Lena Dunham, having gone there. And that's telling. I speak as a person who absolutely loves Lena Dunham in all ways, but it's telling in that there were so many of my friends went to St. Anne's, where Lena Dunham went to these kind of very, very sort of, went to prep schools or bohemian private schools, and they had a lot of support from their parents in their creative endeavors. And financial support, as in like, I'll buy you a brownstone or an apartment and you can write your novel. And I didn't have that. Like, there was a period right after this book takes place where I was, quite honestly, like kind of homeless. I mean, if you really think about it, like, I broke up with Don and allowed him to keep the apartment, but I didn't have enough money for a deposit on a new apartment. And so I just was staying on friends' couches. And, I had some sort of scary times where a friend would say like, oh, I met this guy and I'm going to bring him home tonight, so you can't stay here tonight. And I was like, oh my God, where am I going to stay? And so anyway, point is, that's really why I took this job, and also why I thought like publishing is kind of a socially sanctioned way to kind of try to be a writer. And I feel like it worked out for me in that it, number one, demystified what it means to be a writer. So I saw that, whereas previously it had felt like, there's no career path here. Like, I don't know how this happens. Like, maybe you win a contest, maybe you get a Fulbright. Like, I don't know how this happens. Working at the agency showed me that, if you write a good novel, you're going to find an agent and it's going to get published. And I also, as you guys know, was the first serial person at the agency. And so a lot of what I was doing was selling articles to magazines. And that was really what kind of changed my life, because I first of all made some connections with editors, who I would, eventually, some of them I would either just ask for advice or I would approach about writing articles for them. But I also was like, wait, I can do this. This is not that hard. Like, and here's a way, writing for magazines, like, here's a way of kind of earning a living as a writer, that I think I can handle, that I can manage. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of get on my feet doing that. And some encouragement from, I did an MFA after this, and I had some professors who worked at the New Yorker and other magazines, and they definitely encouraged me. But really the agency kind of showed me the path, showed me that that it's not just like a magic thing that you just like become a writer somehow, that there's actually a path.
Wow. Awesome. Okay.
So I know, sorry,
no, I loved it.
That's a very long answer.
I loved it. It was amazing. I was saying, like, usually I interview people first, so I get all my questions answered, so I can just deal with everyone else's. But now I have like 1,000 questions, but I'll stop. Okay, well, let me just go chronologically from everybody writing questions in the chat. But somebody, Daphne, wanted to know, what made you want to write this book when you did? Why then? Why at all, I guess?
Yeah, well, the real truth is that I did not want to write this book. The book was not my idea. So my first book, as some of you guys may know, was a novel. I think of myself as a novelist, like a journalist and novelist. And I did not really read a lot of memoir. I love personal essays, and I read a lot of personal essays, and have done for my whole life. I'd say, like, in approximately 2002, I was working at a magazine. It closed. The financing was pulled because of September 11th. And a bunch of editors at other magazines kind of took pity on me and the other people that had lost our jobs and invited us in to pitch stories to these various magazines. So at one of them, I had, again, I thought of myself as a journalist. And I went in, I had all of these carefully researched ideas, for reported pieces, that I'd been working on for the magazine that I was a staffer at. I brought them to this magazine, and just almost as if I were possessed, at the end of the meeting, I said, oh, I could also write a piece about answering Salinger's fan mail. And all of a sudden, like, their jaws dropped open, and all the editors, it was, of course, me and a room full of men. And they all suddenly were paying a lot more attention to me. And they said, we'll get back to you, but yeah, that's probably the thing we're going to have you do. So I wrote this essay. It was supposed to be 800 words. It ended up being 8,000 words. And it got a lot of attention. So I was interviewed for a bunch of newspapers. I was on the radio. Agents and editors started calling me. This is so long ago that they were calling me on my landline. And at one point, right after it came out, I was actually at my best friend's wedding in rural Maine. And somehow a reporter from the LA Times got the number at her aunt's compound in Maine, like her aunt's camp in Maine. And like everyone was like, Joanna, there's a reporter on the phone for you. And nobody knew who I was or what, like, or that I was a writer. And they were like, why would a reporter? They were thinking that I was like a murderer or something. And that's why a reporter was calling for me. So anyway, so I wrote this piece. It got a lot of attention. People asked me to turn it into a book, but I was working on my first novel, which would eventually be published. It's called A Fortunate Age. And I actually already had an agent for my magazine work, and I was very poor. So I said to her, should I do this? Should I turn this into a book? And she said, no, because you don't want to be seen as kind of capitalizing on your friendship with Salinger. And she also said, you don't want to be like a Salinger girl. Like, people think of Joyce Maynard as a Salinger girl. Joyce Maynard, who of course wrote this memoir, At Home in the World, about her relationship with Salinger, which was a romantic one, unlike mine. So my agent is a very wise person, and I trusted her. And years went by, and I would say like every few months, over years and years, I would get a call from an agent or an editor saying, hey, I just came across this essay. Do you want to turn this into a book? You already have 8,000 words. Like, it wouldn't be that hard. And I just didn't see it as a book. I felt like I told this story, and that's all I have in me. I don't really like memoir. I don't want to write a memoir. I don't want to read a memoir. So why would I want to write a memoir? And then my novel came out, and I started getting asked to write about Salinger again. And I was actually sort of saying no. And then Salinger died about 6 months later, and I found myself kind of devastated in a way that I would not have anticipated. And I got the news, and I was kind of sobbing, and reread his, my favorites of his books, Franny and Zoe and Catcher in the Rye. And I ended up sort of saying yes when people asked me to write a couple of essays, and again, did more radio stuff. One of those essays caught the attention of BBC Radio 4, and they asked me to turn it into a radio documentary. So I did that, and the script was circulated in the British publishing industry, and someone at Random House UK called me and asked me to turn it into a book. And I actually just said no. I was like, no, thanks. And but this editor was really persistent, and he got a meeting with my agent, and she called me right afterwards and said, he's convinced me. I think that this could be a book. I think you should do this. And I again said no. And she finally said, why don't you just try writing the first few pages? And so I did. She said, give yourself 2 weeks. So I was trying, just kind of sitting at my desk, like basically beating my head against it. Nothing was happening there. And one day, around say 5 o'clock, I went and took a walk on the High Line. My office, I had a little shared writer space that was right by the High Line. And as I was walking uptown on the High Line, there were all of these very young women walking downtown to get on the train, basically. And they all looked like I had in 1996. They were wearing like the, clothing from like the Gap and Strawberry, and they had like the expensive bag or shoes that their mom had bought for them, and they looked so devastatingly, heartbreakingly young. And I just, all of a sudden, the first pages of the book, which are the same as what you've read, came to me, and I went back to my office and called my then husband and said, I have to stay late tonight. And he was like, okay. And I just stayed there till midnight and wrote the first chunk of the book and gave it to my agent. And she said, yes. And I think that what I realized, again, I don't know why I'm giving you such a long answer, but anyway, I think that the reason that I had been resistant to writing it is because I felt that the story was so small, that it was just this little story of this relatively privileged, 23, 24-year-old girl, like in her mini friendship with Salinger, and this like silly thing that I did. I was sort of embarrassed by my very young self, and I didn't really want to write about it. And I also was horrified by my having abandoned my college boyfriend, who's the love of my life. I knew in some kind of very deep primal place that if I were to write this book, I would have to write honestly about what happened with him, and I was scared to do that. And taking that walk on the High Line and seeing these hordes of young women made me realize that there was a universality to my story, and that it would probably be interesting to someone other than, 5 other people. And that I had something to say about what it was like to be a very young woman in New York, um, feeling so alone and kind of trying to find my way, trying to carve out a life for myself, under the constraints that I outlined for you guys, without a safety net. And so, yeah, so I did it.
Wow, this is amazing. I feel like I should just like ask you a 3-word question, and then we can have the rest of the book club be that answer. This is amazing. I could sit and listen to you forever. I love it.
Oh God, I was gonna say, I'm gonna try to be more
No,
concise.
don't. I love it. I'm gonna assume other people love it, because if I'm enjoying it, I'm like, anyway. Somebody is asking how close your real life is to the facts in the book. Is this basically, I know you had a letter in the beginning, like sort of, hedging, but is this mostly what happened? I guess somebody wants to know.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah, it really is very close to what happened. There are a couple of things, but there's really one major thing, incident in the book that, I mean, I wouldn't say it's major, but there's one incident in the book that, in my final rewrite before turning it in, I shifted when it happens. In reality, it happened kind of closer to the beginning of the book of that year, and I shift it to the end, because I just had to make the story work. And once I made that change, the book fully fell into place. But in general, everything in the book happened. Everything in the movie, if you guys have seen the movie, did not happen.
Yes, that was the next question, is
Yeah.
how you felt about it being made into a movie and what that whole process has been like.
Oh God. So I felt great about it being made into a movie, because I mean that's everyone's dream, right? And it went through a few different incarnations. It was actually initially going to be developed by a totally different company and team of people. And with actually a female screenwriter, and then that sort of didn't work out. Like there were problems with the different people working together, and they had different visions for it. And then we moved on to the people who actually made the film. And I was very, very closely involved, with the production. So I was a script consultant for the first year or two. Initially, I was going to write the screenplay. Then the director decided that he wanted to, in his words, take a stab at it. He had never written a screenplay on his own before. He had only collaborated with people. And so the idea was that he would write it, but with me consulting. So for a couple of years, every few months he would give me a draft, and I would send him back 10 pages of notes, or he lives in Montreal. He would fly down to Boston where I live, and we would spend the whole day, talking things through and sort of reading dialogue aloud to each other and crossing things out and rewriting things and brainstorming ways to open the book up. And it was really, really, really fun. And I feel like I had almost a kind of dream scenario for the film, just in that Philippe, the director, who has his own production company, though the film was also financed, by all sorts of other production companies. He said to me from the start, I can't make this film without you. if you want to just sell the rights and walk away and write your next book, I'm not the director for you. And so I was talking to all different producers and directors and what have you. And he made it very clear that that this was going to kind of take over my life. And that is indeed what happened. Like, my new book is late because of this. But, ultimately I did a huge rewrite of the screenplay. The actress who plays me, Margaret Qualley, was my first choice. She was my idea. They listened to me and cast her. And this is before she was as well known as she is now. She had only appeared in one movie, Novitiate and The Leftovers, but they trusted me enough to cast her. So it was a great process in general. There were some blips along the way, like the director being, a French Canadian man, writing scenes in which the me character sits around watching hockey in my underwear. And, and I had to say, like, literary young women do not sit in their apartments in New York watching hockey. I don't know if any young women in New York sit around in their underwear watching hockey. And also I was like, women don't sit around in their underwear in real life, like, we want to take off our bras. But anyway, in general, it was pretty great. I've had friends who've had much less input into the films of their books, and so I felt really lucky.
Sorry, kids are sneaking in after school. Trying to hide that. Anyway,
that's my life too. I have 3 kids, so trust me.
Oh my gosh, how old are your kids?
My kids are 5, 12, and 16.
I have 6, 7, and 13, and 13 again. So yes, we're in the same spread.
We're in the same. Yeah.
Wait, you keep referencing this next book. Can you tell us a little more about it? I know it's emotional for you to discuss, but I'm curious.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I have to get used to it. It's so my next book is called The Fifth Passenger. I should say I have 2 books that I'm working on right now, and one is a novel that is about it. I don't know why I'm telling you the one that's not due next, but
that's okay.
But it's called Money. It's called Money or Love, and it's basically a contemporary retelling of the Age of Innocence. And initially, it was actually set in 2010 and 2011, and it was about the fallout from the global economic collapse. And during the pandemic, I actually rewrote it. So it's now set during the fallout from the pandemic. So it's set a little bit in the future. So that is fun. And it's about a TV actress. There are a few characters, but it's about basically sort of like a person who was once a TV star, who is from this area, from the Boston suburbs, and who, for various reasons, moves back here. Her career is kind of faltering, and she marries a wealthy man, and has this idea that, like, she needs to live a more authentic life, and she moves back here. But then the book that I have to turn in first, which is a little bit less fun to work on, it's called The Fifth Passenger, and basically it is about, I'm smiling as I say this horrible tragic story. I grew up believing that I had one sister, and that my family there's something just strange about my family, that we didn't fit in at all where we lived. And there's just something off about us that people sensed. And eventually, when I was in middle school, I discovered by accident that there had actually been 2 kids in between us who I didn't know what, I mean, I now know what happened to them, but just who were gone. So I assumed that they had died. No one told me. And it turned out that there had been basically a kind of code of silence in my family about, I'm from a huge New York family. And, I spent every weekend with my extended family, and no one ever talked about them. And I guess to protect well, what I thought my mother, but it now turns out it was actually my father. No one ever even mentioned their names. And I, as an adult, never even knew what happened to them. And so the book is partially about my childhood and what was going on with my surviving sister, who had sort of, because of this code of silence, kind of was, her life had kind of fallen apart. She, was not allowed to speak the name of her brother and sister, and was involved in their deaths, suffice it to say. And there's a lot of tension between her and my parents, and some very, very bad, dark things happened to her. She fell into addiction, all sorts of things. But so it's partly about my childhood with all this stuff going on. And then there are two timelines. And then the framework for the book is me now, going back and basically reporting out what happened. So it's not me now, it's me pre-pandemic, going back to the town I'm from, which is a town in New York called Nyack, and interviewing people, looking at court records, and sort of unraveling the story, which turned out to be much larger than I anticipated.
Wow.
So,
well, that's going to be amazing. Hurry up and finish. I want to read it. Right?
I have to finish it very soon, so please wish me luck.
Oh my gosh, good luck. But your audience will be waiting with bated breath, and it must be really emotional to write about all that. So, especially on deadline and everything. But yeah, wow.
Deadlines are good, I think. At least for me, I need a deadline. The more deadlines, the better.
Okay, I'm seeing if there's any else. We have almost no time left. I'm like, I want to keep talking to you. Does anybody want to ask one question just to open it up? Because I feel terrible that I didn't call in anybody else. Anybody have a question before we go? Anybody? Lisa, want to ask the one question?
Yes, the one question. And somebody may have put this in the chat as well, so it's not just my idea. But do you get fan letters? And if so, how do you respond to them?
That's such a good question. I think about this all the time. I do get fan letters, and I have done, even before I published a book, I was a columnist for various magazines, and I would get fan letters for my columns, and and I have a really different relationship to fan mail because of my Salinger experience. So I do try to respond. And now, of course, I feel this is so obvious, but I'll just say it. Like now, of course, I get, DMs on Instagram and tons of Facebook messages and everything, like people writing to me on Twitter. And so there's that. And then there are lots of people who are like, oh, wouldn't it be cute to send her physical mail? So I still get, physical mail from people, which I love. That's my favorite. So I do respond to people, but I of course try to respond to everyone and try to respond to everything really quickly. But I now have so much more sympathy for Salinger because it really does take a lot out of you. Like it kind of takes from the same place that writing does. So I have to be really careful and kind of set limits, not about how much I'll respond to, but about when I do it, and say to myself, it's okay that this is sitting there. You can do it after you turn in that book review, or this is something you can do when you're tired. Don't use your writing time for this.
Thank you. Great.
Awesome. Well, Joanna, thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This is so exciting.
Oh. Well, I can't wait for our actual podcast. I think it's coming up soon. And yeah, I thank you on behalf of everybody for coming. Do you guys want to do a little applause, unmute, and say whatever you want to?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, God,
Thank
you all for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. You guys have made my week.
Can't wait to read your next book. Books.
Thank
you.
Great. You have lots of messages in the comments if you want to peruse, but everybody's just loving you. So anyway. All right. Well, I hope to see everybody back. We're doing, Joanna, come if you want. We're doing The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson next. So
What date is that, Zibby?
What's that? It's
What days a day?
that's a good question. I think it's in 2 weeks. Hold on, I'm triple
Okay.
checking. Yes, April 27th at 2:00. And you
Okay.
can read along with me on the new Fable app, which I mentioned at the beginning. So you can do enhanced e-reading if you want to read along that way as well on Fable. So thank you again, Joanna. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.